Do you know creating HTML games using React is easy and fast? You can create games like Ludo, Tic Tac Toe, Chess in minutes using React. Also, React is smart enough to instantly give response to your user's action and make a great first impression. You can host these games on platforms like Facebook Instant Games to earn revenue. React is a declarative component-based JavaScript library for building user interfaces. It uses a virtual DOM, which is much lighter than the real DOM, and hence operations are much faster compared to real DOM. Also, React makes it painless to create interactive user interfaces. First, you need to create some simple components for each state in your application. Then you can combine those components to create a complex user interface. React will efficiently update and render the correct components when your data changes. Now let's get started creating Tic Tac Toe using React. Before start creating a new React project, make sure you already have Node.js installed. If not, you can follow their official website to download and install Node.js. Link is in the description. You can use Create React App package to set up a new React project. Create React App is an officially supported way to create single-page React applications. It offers a modern build setup with no configurations, which means you will get a full-fledged development environment by running only one command. Open up a terminal window and run npx create react app followed by your app name. In our case, it's Tic Tac Toe. It will take a while to download all the required packages. Once it completes successfully, you will get one directory with the same name as our app name. Open this folder in any text editor. I will use Visual Studio Code. So here you can see the directory structure. You need to put all the source code inside this src folder. This folder already contains some components, but they are of no use now. You can delete these files. Now we are ready to create our required components. First, you need an index.js file that will work as the primary entry point to our program. Import both React and React DOM packages in this module. Also import the app component, which we will create after a while. To render this app component into the DOM, you need the render function from the React DOM package. You need to pass two arguments in this render function. The first one is the component to be rendered and the second one is the container element. If you are already familiar with React, you know these things pretty well. Now let's create the app component. Create a new file, name it as app.js, import the React package. Now there are two ways to create components in React. You can either use a JavaScript class or a function. Since React has introduced hooks, I'm pretty comfortable with functional components. If you want, you can use class components also. So in my case, the app component will be a function. As you already know, all React components receive properties from its parent. So in case of functional components, it must have one argument. You can name it as props. For now, this component will only return the grid component, which we have not created till now. Before returning it, we must import it in this module. Later, we will modify this return statement. Now, as you know, you must export this function from this module to import it in the index.js module. Now you need two more components. The first one is required to display the grid and the second one is required to show details about the player, like who is taking turn, who is with the winner after completion, etc. Let's first create the grid component. So create a new file, name it as grid.js, import the React package. Again we will use functional component, so create a new function with one argument. Export this function from this module. For a 3x3 grid, we will have a total of 9 cells. We can use HTML division element to create each cell. Now we can put 9 division elements successively wrapped in another division element to form the grid. Now Create React App provides a development server that you can use to locally serve our JavaScript bundle along with a template HTML. But before that, use a background color for these divisions so that we will be able to locate them easily. To add a background color to these divisions, you can use CSS. Again, there is no configuration needed for using CSS in your React app created by Create React App. Even you can use CSS modules by using a dot module extension before the .css extension in the file name. Now let's create a CSS module for the grid component. Name it as grid.module.css. In this module, create a CSS class named container. We will put some CSS properties in this class after a while, but for now do something like this. This will add a red background to all the division elements, which are direct children of the element holding this class name. And if we do not set this height and width property to a specific value, they will be 0 by default, as this division element does not have any content. Now import this module in the grid component and use the container class for this division. Now open the built-in terminal and run npm run start to start the development server. It will open up a new browser window. As you can see here, this does not look like a grid because the default layout of a division element is block, not grid. So you need to change the layout to grid. To do that, open the CSS module we created a while ago. In the container CSS class, set the display property to grid. This will ensure that the layout of the container division element is grid instead of block. You need to set another property called grid to set the number of rows, number of columns and size of each cell of the grid. This will ensure that the grid will have 3 rows, 3 columns and size of each cell is 85 pixels by 85 pixels. Save the changes and your browser window will automatically refresh. Now as you can see here, we have a grid, but we need some gap between each cell. So set the gap property to 5 pixels. Now this one looks like a grid. Put some margin in the container. Now we don't want the red background. Instead we want the background to be white. So remove red and put white. But when using white background, we will not be able to differentiate the cells. To solve this problem, you can change the background color of the container element. Also use a specific height and width for the container. I will link a good article about CSS Grid in the description. Now as our grid is ready, we can add the next feature. When we will click on any of these divisions, a cross or a circle will appear. To do that, we first need two SVGs, one circle SVG and one cross SVG. You can use any tool to create these SVGs. I will suggest you to use figma.com. Making SVGs in figma.com is easy and fast. Go to figma.com, log in or sign up. I'm already logged in. Open a new file. Click on this shape tool and select ellipse. Draw an ellipse by holding the left mouse button. Convert it to a circle by making the width and height equal. Remove the fill and give one stroke. Change the stroke width to 10. Now right click on the circle and click copy as SVG. In your source folder, create a new folder, name it as SVGs. Create a new file in this SVGs folder, name it as circle.js. Our purpose is to wrap the SVG in a React component so we can modify its size using props. So import the React package in this module, create a new function,
paste the SVG in the return statement. To change the SVG size using props, we can do something like this. So if there is no size property given, it will use this default size. Similarly, we need to make another component for the cross SVG. Now to render these SVG components inside the grid cells, you must put them inside these division elements. But manually putting them inside these division elements will not work because the user will decide where to put a circle or a cross. To solve this problem, you need to use a state in your app component. You can use an array of length 9 to store the positions of circles and crosses. You may use a two-dimensional array, but a one-dimensional array will also work fine. Initially, the array will contain only null values, which implies an empty grid, and then the user will click on different cells of the grid and we will store the positions of circles and crosses. Previously, you were manually putting 9 divisions one after another inside this grid component, but now you need to generate these 9 divisions dynamically depending on the array element values. So here you can use the map function to create division elements from array elements. As the array is a state of the app component, you need to pass it to grid component through props. Now you can map this array to create division elements dynamically. Now if the array element value is null, you do not need to render any SVG. If the array element value is cross, you need to render the cross SVG component. Similarly, if the value is circle, you need to render the circle SVG component. So we can create a function to execute this logic. First import both the SVG components, then create a new function. We will take the array element value through argument. Now if the value is cross, we need to return cross component. If the value is circle, we need to return the circle component, and otherwise we will return null. Now call this function from here. Now to render the SVG components when the user will click on the grid cells, we must send this setState function through props. As you know, the setState function accepts two types of arguments, either a new state or a function which will return the new state. When the state is dependent on the previous state, we need to use a function which takes the previous state as an argument, and as React suggests, we should not change the state directly. Instead, we should create a new array from the previous array and modify that with new values and return that from this function. Only sending this setState function through props will not work. We need to call it when click event occurs on these divisions. Now we can test our code. To test it, click on any of the divisions and it will render the cross SVG. This cross SVG is too large to fit in our grid cells, so let's reduce the size. Now you can see here the SVG elements are not at the middle of the cells. So to keep them in the middle, we can use flex layout. So now the SVG at the center, but we are only rendering the cross SVG. So we need to change our logic to alternatively render cross and circle SVGs. To do that, we can change our state. Instead of only storing the positions in our state, we can store the turn and positions both in our state using a JavaScript object. Wherever we are using positions, we need to use data.positions. Then on each state update, we need to alter the turn of cross and circles. So here you can see our logic is working fine, but one problem is still there. If we click on an existing cross or circle, it also changes. We need to stop this behavior. To do that, we can use a condition inside setState that we will only change the data if the array element value is null. Otherwise, we will not change it. If this condition does not satisfy, we will return the previous data, and which will not cause a state update, as you know. So here you can see if we click on an empty cell, it only changes value, and if we click on any cell which already contains a cross or a circle, it doesn't changes. Now we need a way to declare a winner. To do that, we will again add a new field in our state object. Let's call this field winner. Initially this field will be undefined, and we will set this field when we get a winner. To calculate a winner, you can use the following logic. To observe how the state value changes, you can log this value in the console. Here we are getting some error due to the stroke width property we set in our SVG components. Also use some key in these divisions. So here you can see when there is 3 consecutive circles or crosses, the winner field is changed. Now to reflect the changes visually, we can do something like this. So first of all, we need to store the indexes, and then we need to check if a particular division has that index. Includes function returns true or false depending on a value exists inside an array or not. Now we can use player information component, which will display the information about the player, like who is taking turn or who is the winner, etc. So you can do something like this. So if there is a winner, we don't need to show the turn, we just need to show the winner. So we can do something like this. This is it for now. See you in the next video.